The last time we were talking about the role of magic in The Tempest, comparing it with the other important book that is Midsummer Night's Dreams. Naturally, The Tempest is full of magic, as we have seen. It is a world where supernatural acquires a fundamental role. Alonso, for example, can represent the real world, where Ariel, the supernatural, and Prospero, in some way, commands and controls both of these elements. In fact, if you remember the famous line that is pronounced by Prospero, suggests that life is just an illusion. When he says, "We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep." Uh, at the time of The Tempest, Shakespeare and his audiences were very interested in the idea of colonization. In fact, in that period, England with Elizabeth I was very much interested in the economic trade with other nations and the conquering of other lands. So it was a theme that was very much present in Elizabethan times. So this relationship between Prospero and Caliban, that is in some way the island native. In this relationship, there is the role between the conqueror and the conquered, and Shakespeare examines the role of the colonizer and the colonized. Prospero in some way sees Caliban as an inferior being who should be grateful to him for letting him out of his savagery. While on the other hand, we see Caliban that in some way feels robbed of his land and reduced to the state of, or the condition of a slave. The peculiar feature of The Tempest, it acquires, it gives us this timeless and magical atmosphere, mainly through the role of allegories. The universal tale about the universal struggle between chaos and harmony is at the center of all the work by Shakespeare. Music and dance, at the same time, contribute to the creation of this magical atmosphere. Now, The Tempest belongs to the last period of Shakespeare's works, and it is characterized by a certain serenity in the human relationships. Shakespeare seems eager to show that good can come out of evil. And in fact, at the end, there is no tragic ending in these works. All ends in peace and in a state of reconciliation. Now, Prospero's magic power can be seen as a metaphor for the playwright's power also. And this is what Shakespeare intended with his role as a playwright. Prospero is like a director who manages the action on set from behind the scenes. So he controls or gives life to what is happening on the stage. So where Prospero in some way creates illusions, situations and conflicts which then he can solve through the use of magic, the playwright at the same time creates the same situation through the power of words. In the epilogue, Prospero asks the audience for an applause that will set him free. He says, "Release me from my bands with the help of your good hands." So, just like Shakespeare, that in some way gives his farewell to the theatre and goes back to his native city, that is Stratford. Now, the progress of Shakespeare's play is usually linked to the gradual clarification of things. The themes are hinted at the beginning, and their meaning becomes clear only later on, towards the end of the play. Most of the time, Shakespeare disregarded the three Aristotelian unities of time, place, and action, so that the structure of the play was very much flexible, even because, as we were talking about this last period of his works, he goes far away from England, so even the place is changeable according to the situation he wants to create. Regarding the stage directions, where generally we see the playwright intervenes directly on how he wants things to go on the stage, in Shakespeare, it is the text itself that gives these elements, that provide information about the atmosphere and the feeling of a determined scene. So Shakespeare asks for the actor cooperation, though the active cooperation also of the spectator, in making the play come alive in his or her imagination also. There was a kind of interaction between what happened on the stage and what was the role of the spectators around the stage. Shakespeare did not take his characters, as we know, from only one social class. Hierarchy forms the background of every play. And another important characteristic, in fact, is the importance of the family ties in each work that we are reading. Now, Shakespeare used different levels of speech and action to portray a rhetorical or his characters in particular way. His language is characterized by a wide variety of figures, of rhetorical figures, like similes, metaphors, assonance, alliteration, image clusters. These image clusters, very frequent in his works, are recurrent groupings of metaphors and similes. To give you an idea, for example, if we go to Romeo and Juliet, we find these image clusters that are connected to the main themes of the play and define in some way its tone. For example, contrast between love and death, light and darkness, youth and age, order and disorder. So, we know that Shakespeare chose the Italian city of Verona as the setting of the play because Italians were probably considered violent and passionate. The social context arises from the struggle between the two families of the Capulets and the Montagues. Now, Romeo is presented as belonging to the courtly love convention. On the other hand, we see Juliet, that is the light that frees him from his dark melancholy. Romeo's love for Juliet, in some way, makes him gives him new life, makes him more dynamic and courageous. Some of the themes that we can point out in this famous and very important work is, for example, the power of love, where their love is much more important than their link to their families. Passion and violence, we see that from Tybalt's death up to the lover's suicides. It's a fundamental characteristic. The individual that in some way is against or contrasts the society where the aims of the two protagonists in some way differ from those of the society. And last of all, the power of fate. In fact, from the beginning, the chorus defines this story as star-crossed, where star-crossed actually means that fate has a fundamental role in how the things will go on, will be considered. We know that so feelings and emotions, specifically here in Romeo and Juliet, are the essence of humanism, and love stories concentrate on the emotional effects of love. We were saying that words are very important in William Shakespeare to give the right atmosphere and create the tone of the scene. But not only through the meaning, but also through the sound. Shakespeare wants to enchant the ears of his audience. And early plays, for example, like Romeo and Juliet or even Richard II, have a more lyrical and musical tone, whilst the later plays like Antony and Cleopatra or King Lear, the language here becomes much more abrupt, sometimes even harsh in its sound and also in its meaning. Now, Shakespeare is aware of his audience being a mixed up group coming from all social classes, and he tries to establish a kind of intimacy with the audience. In fact, we know that his soliloquies are a kind of intimate communication with the people that are in the theatre. It's quite like something that he wants the people to know that other characters on the stage do not know, so intimate. He puts them in directly in how is the evolution of the play. We know that the plays generally took place during the daylight, in the afternoon, after the theatre had its flag on top, so that it gave the information to the people that in a determined moment there would have been a play getting on. So the play took place during the daylight, and we know also that the stage is surrounded by people, so this intimacy is quite logical, or also in the space that the theatre had for itself. So the audience wanted also a variety of things. It wanted action and blood for the unlettered, for example, fine phrases and wit for the gallants, thought and learning for the more scholarly, humor for the refined, love interest for the ladies, song and dance for everybody. And Shakespeare managed to give his audience all this. We know also that in Shakespeare's times, collaboration was quite a normal thing, and often he took his story from an existing play or short stories even from other nations, like the Italians ones we have seen, and refashioned it, giving it a new life. For example, Seneca, who modeled his works on the Greek tradition, modified by his Stoic philosophy, had a penetrating influence on English tragedy. I mean, would have not been possible for him to write Hamlet if he didn't put in practice all what was happening in the Senecan theatre. But even Machiavelli's view of power influenced in some way the Elizabethan tragedy. In fact, the first example of the Senecan elements, we find them in Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy.